Today I'm going to be presenting on some research we've done in an Australian sample of adolescents. So looking at some predictive factors of teenagers who engage in trolling behaviours online. So just like to acknowledge my co-contributors to the project and also UniSQ for funds received to support the work. Just before I get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and the waterways where the university is located and pay my deep respects to elders past, present and future. So this research that I'm presenting on today has been recently published in a PLOS One article, and basically it sits in a broader program of research over the last few years that we've been looking at predictive factors of trolling behaviours online, and up until this point we had only looked at this in adult samples, and so the research that we're looking at today is investigating the behaviour in adolescents. Okay, so what is internet trolling? So a disruptive online behaviour intended to provoke and distress others for one's own amusement. So early conceptualisation of trolling outlined four main characteristics. So deception, aggression, disruption and success. And it's this disruptive characteristic of trolling that really separates it from other antisocial online behaviours, so things like cyberbullying. So trolls deliberately deceive others by pretending to be a sincere member of an online community when their real intention is to actually trigger conflict or cause disruption, and they do this for the purpose of their own amusement. If their behaviour goads others into retaliating, then their trolling is considered to be a success. So there are different types of trolling, so you might have heard of things like kudos trolling, RIP or memorial trolling, and in this research we looked at trolling that had the intention to cause harm. So we didn't look at the different types of trolling per se, definitely in agreement that there are different types, but we've just focused on the main, we've just focused on the type with the intention to cause harm. So just to highlight a couple of the distinctions between trolling and cyberbullying. So in trolling, deliberately starting an argument to get attention, typically the parties are not known to each other, and it really is about causing that senseless disruption, whereas cyberbullying, really the intention to cause fear and harm, more likely that the parties are known to each other, and one of the key characteristics of cyberbullying is that repetitive nature of it. So it's summed up really nicely in the quote from Craker and March. So although trolling behaviours and cyberbullying share aggressive attributes, cyberbullies are not characteristically deceptive or meaninglessly disruptive. Research on cyberbullying suggests quite the contrary, that cyberbullies are often known to their victims in real life, and the harassing behaviour involved in cyberbullying is very direct and specifically targeted. Okay, so how common is internet trolling, and is it an issue? And this is actually a really challenging question to address, because there's lots of different statistics out there that don't often look at trolling per se. So we've got 39% of Australian adults have experienced online harassment. So whether or not that's trolling specific, it covers a broader range of behaviours. 44% of Australian teens reported a negative online experience in the previous 6 months, but again, we're not looking at trolling specific behaviours there. We've got 20% of Australian adolescents who experience cyberbullying, and 12% of American adolescents admitted to cyberbullying others. There's also been some other statistics, so approximately 25% of American adults indicated that they had engaged in trolling behaviour, and about 25% of UK teens had also experienced trolling. However, I couldn't get the original data from that study to look at that in more detail. So yes, we think it is an issue because people are definitely experiencing antisocial behaviours online, but it's hard to kind of quantify exactly how often people are being trolled or how often they're trolling others. So I guess then, is trolling problematic? Well, we think it is problematic because it's associated with a range of negative consequences for both the troll and the target. So negative impacts for the troll are things like possible legal ramifications depending on the extent of the trolling behaviour, and targets of trolling report experiencing negative psychological consequences. So for example, elevated distress, lower levels of self-esteem, increases in suicide ideation and also self-harm behaviour. So a fairly significant issue. Okay, so what do we know about adults who troll? We'll come back to looking at the dark tetrad of personality on the next slide, and break that down in a bit more detail. So some factors that have been implicated. So the first one is antisocial rewards, or something called negative social potency. So we can think about social rewards in two different ways. We've got typical and atypical rewards. So typical social rewards generally occur through reciprocal social behaviours and interactions. So we experience these typical social rewards when we engage in, say, helpful behaviours or altruistic behaviours. Enjoyment of antisocial rewards, however, is the rewarding feelings that some people experience when they have interpersonal interactions that might hurt, irritate, annoy or anger others. So negative social potency has been both correlated and predictive of trolling behaviours in adult samples. We also know that there's been some findings to suggest that self-esteem might be implicated in trolling. It has also been implicated in a range of other antisocial online behaviours. It's not been looked at specifically in an adolescent sample, but we do know that self-esteem does have a relationship again with other antisocial online behaviours. We know that there's been relationships with empathy, so specifically looking at cognitive or affective empathy in adults who troll, and there's been a relationship between decreased affective empathy and trolling behaviour. Again, it's not been explored in adolescents who troll, but we do know that there's relationships between lower levels of empathy and other forms of antisocial behaviour, whether it be online or offline. There's also been research that's found that it's men versus women who are more likely to engage in trolling behaviour online as well. So just some of the factors that we think are currently involved. So looking at the dark tetrad of personality traits, so initially conceptualised as the dark triad, it comprises the different traits of Machiavellianism, narcissism, sadism and psychopathy, and the two traits that reliably have come out, at least in samples of adults, really is sadism, so that enjoyment of hurting someone else or causing harm, and psychopathy. So psychopathy is typically characterised by things like diminished empathy, impulsivity, thrill-seeking, interpersonal manipulation and emotional shallowness. Okay, so looking specifically at adolescence and trolling. So we know that adolescence is a significant developmental period. It's significant biologically, socially and also psychosocially. So adolescents are adjusting to new challenges, they're developing new skills, responsibilities, forming different intimate relationships. It's also a period that they might seek more novelty, arousal and excitement. So it could be that during this period of development that there might be more sensitivity to different kinds of rewards. Also, adolescents typically are receiving less supervision than they would have as a child. We also know that trolling is qualitatively distinct from cyberbullying, at least in samples of adults, but it's yet to be explored in an adolescent sample. So just some of the reasons why we think it might be particularly important to have a look at it in adolescents. So then what did the current study do? So we wanted to understand why people troll, specifically Australian adolescents, again, because it hadn't really been looked at. So what we know from adult samples is that psychopathy, sadism, self-esteem, empathy, negative social potency have all correlated with increased incidence of trolling. So we think that these might be particularly relevant in adolescents because of that sensitive developmental period and also the relationships with other forms of antisocial online behaviour within adolescence. So it might be things like cyberbullying. Okay, so we aim to explore adolescents' experiences of trolling. So what we mean by that is we were really interested in the proportion of teens who had engaged in trolling behaviour or who had experienced it themselves. We also wanted to replicate adult research that had constructed a psychological profile of the internet troll. So we predicted that high psychopathy, high sadism, low self-esteem, low cognitive empathy, low affective empathy and high negative social potency would be predictive of trolling behaviours. So after obtaining institutional ethical approval, we recruited a sample of 157 Australian adolescents aged between 13 to 18 years who did use social media in a typical week. They were offered a small incentive for participation as well. So we collected some basic demographic information from the participants and also asked them a range of questions that related to their internet and social media use. So for example, what platforms they used, how often they spent on social media, or how often they spent, the amount of time they spent on the internet. We also gave them questions related to their experience of trolling, and this particular question is how we assessed, I guess, the proportion who had experienced trolling and who are engaging in trolling behaviour. So we actually gave them an operationalised definition because we wanted to be really clear about what we were conceptualising as trolling and what really defined the behaviour. So after the definition, we asked them, during the past year, did anybody ever troll you on the internet? How many different times did someone troll you? For example, at different times by different people or different reasons. And then we asked the question again, except this time it was during the past year, did you ever troll anybody on the internet? If they said yes, then how many different times did you troll on the internet? We also provided participants with a range of measures to assess the factors that we discussed earlier. So the global assessment of internet trolling was used in the regression analyses in terms of what factors predicted trolling, so separate to that operational definition we just looked at. Adolescent measure of empathy and sympathy, self-esteem scale, youth psychopathy traits inventory, social rewards questionnaire, specifically the negative social potency subscale, and the short statistic impulse scale. Okay, so what did we find? 24.2% of participants had been trolled in the previous year. So 28.1% of boys and 19.8% of girls. In terms of comparing this to the figures, it's a little bit challenging to do because, again, we didn't really have that nice proportion to start with of, say, adults who troll, and we didn't have that for adolescents who troll. 13.4% of participants had trolled others in the previous year. So by gender, 28.1% of boys and 3.3% of girls. So what is worth highlighting here is you might be seeing the similarity between this 28.1% statistics. It's not an error, that's what came out. But what I will say is we did find a relationship between people who had trolled were more likely to troll others and vice versa. However, it wasn't a direct one-to-one correspondence. So we're not talking about the exact same 28.1% of people, if that makes sense. Okay, so individuals who had experienced trolling were more likely to troll others than those who had not experienced trolling. We found that gender, high psychopathy, high sadism, low cognitive empathy, high negative social potency were related to increased trolling behaviours, and with gender it was boys. The relationship was strongest for negative social potency, followed by psychopathy, sadism, gender, and cognitive empathy. Okay, but what actually predicted the trolling behaviour? So when we ran the hierarchical multiple regression, what we found was combined, the variables explained a significant 30.7%, so that is actually quite a large number. But if we looked at the factors themselves, the three that came out as significant in their own right was gender, again being male, high levels of psychopathy and high levels of negative social potency. So again, it's that enjoyment of those antisocial interpersonal interactions. So how is this similar to adults? The similarity is, again, that high psychopathy, high levels of negative social potency. So this has been found in previous samples of adults, but different is that sadism, self-esteem and affective empathy were not unique predictors. Okay, so just to summarise the key findings of the study, so high psychopathy correlated with and uniquely predicted trolling, high levels of negative social potency, again correlated with and uniquely predicted trolling. So sadism was significant at the bivariate level, so we had a relationship there, but it wasn't a unique predictor of trolling, and that is a differential finding from previous samples. Cognitive empathy was a significant correlate of trolling, but again, it didn't emerge as a unique predictor. Affective empathy, it wasn't correlated, and also it wasn't a significant predictor. Same for self-esteem. Age was not a significant correlate of trolling behaviour. Gender was a significant with boys more likely to engage in trolling than girls, and there was that significant correlation between trolling and being trolled. You can see that similarity when you look at the statistics, however, it wasn't that direct one-to-one correlation. Okay, so I guess what does it mean and where to from here? So the contributions, I guess, of this study is that trolling behaviours we know are problematic. They're problematic because they have negative impacts for the individual who is doing the trolling potentially, and also individuals who experience being trolled. So we obviously want to know more about who's engaging in this behaviour, because it would be great if we could do something about it. So in order to get to that step, we need to find out a little bit more. And I think that this is just a starting study to enable us to do that. So, you know, acknowledging that the sample that we had was small, it was, you know, about 150 participants. So it's certainly not a prevalent study or anything like that. So it would be really great that we could replicate this on a larger scale, because it could have implications for how we prevent and manage trolling. Even if it's not a targeted intervention per se and who's engaging in the behaviour, it could still be really beneficial in terms of developing educational programs for people who are experiencing trolling, maybe helping them to recognise what trolling behaviour is. So a good starting study, but much to be done. In terms of the limitations, so the sampling procedure, so acknowledging that it was people opting in, so people might have participated, say if they'd experienced trolling or were perpetrating trolling. Also, we didn't have a strategy at the outset to detect or prevent bot completion, so that was a bit of an issue. We were able to find that data and remove that, and we've talked about that quite extensively in the publication. Also acknowledging that the data was collected during COVID-19, so there has been some research to suggest that there's been increased incidence of antisocial online behaviour during that time. One of, I think, the key limitations, which also then is a really lovely future direction, is that we didn't specifically look at the sites that this was occurring or the platforms that this is occurring. So in future research, it would be really interesting, I think, to know where people are actually experiencing those trolling behaviours. Also, I think there's more to tease apart in terms of the effects that there were to do with gender, and so definitely recommend that could be a direction for future research as well. So the take-home message here then, I guess, is that adolescents and adults troll for the enjoyment of antisocial interpersonal reactions. So again, that's that negative social potency variable, but the desire to cause harm, so high levels of sadism, is less relevant for adolescents. So I actually think that that's one of the really nice findings of this study. And for more information, please feel free to contact me at the address you see on the slide. Thank you.